Hello everyone, and welcome back to Sleepless Campfire. Tonight, we travel into the forgotten back roads of America, places where light fades, and what remains are stories that refuse to die. Across these hills, rivers, and empty towns are accounts drawn from witness reports, police files, and archived broadcasts, each one verified, recorded, and retold in their own words. The tribal police departments that serve Native American reservations across this country operate in some of the most isolated and challenging environments in law enforcement. When they receive a call for a welfare check, a request to verify the well-being of someone who may be in danger, they often travel alone into vast territories where backup is hours away. Most of these routine checks end with reassurance and assistance, but some do not. What follows are 8 documented cases of tribal police welfare checks that crossed from routine duty into the realm of the unexplained. These accounts come from official reports, witness testimony, and recorded transmissions that have never been fully explained. They represent moments when officers answered a call for help and found themselves confronting something beyond their training and experience. These stories span multiple reservations across different regions of the country, from the arid landscapes of the Southwest to the dense forests of the Pacific Northwest. What connects them is not just their disturbing nature, but the lingering questions they leave behind. In each case, officers arrived expecting to find a citizen in need of assistance, but instead encountered something that defied logical explanation. The files we'll examine tonight have been verified through multiple sources. Police reports, dispatch logs, and in some cases, audio recordings confirm the basic facts of each encounter. What remains unexplained is what exactly these officers witnessed during their welfare checks, and why some of them never returned. Now, let us begin with our first story. It was late October of 2012. When Officer Darren Begay of the Navajo Nation Police Department received a call about an elderly woman who hadn't been seen for 3 days in the remote community of Chilchinbeto, Arizona. At 42 years old, Begay had served his community for over a decade, patrolling the 27,000 square miles of the Navajo Reservation with quiet dedication. That evening, as the desert sun dipped below the horizon, he radioed dispatch to confirm his arrival at the isolated Hogan, where 78-year-old Eliza Tso lived alone. The transmission that came through to dispatch at 6:47 p.m. was normal in every respect. Begay reported that he was approaching the dwelling and would conduct his check before radioing back with his findings. What followed was a period of silence lasting approximately 12 minutes, after which dispatch attempted to contact Begay with no response. The next transmission, logged at 7:02 p.m., contained only what investigators would later describe as unintelligible breathing sounds, followed by a sudden cutoff. When backup units arrived 35 minutes later, they found Begay's patrol vehicle parked with the driver's door open, engine still running, headlights illuminating the empty desert landscape. Officer Begay was nowhere to be found. The Hogan itself stood approximately 50 yards from the patrol car, its traditional octagonal structure silhouetted against the deepening twilight. Inside, investigators discovered no signs of Eliza Tso, no body. No indication of struggle, no personal belongings scattered about. What they did find were Begay's flashlight lying on the dirt floor. Its beam pointed toward the east-facing entrance, and his service revolver placed carefully on a small wooden table near the center of the room. Most puzzling were a series of small, child-sized footprints in the dust floor prints that appeared to enter the Hogan, but not exit. The search party that combed the surrounding desert that night found no trace of either Begay or Tso, despite covering a 5-mile radius with thermal imaging equipment and search dogs. The official investigation, led by the FBI under its jurisdiction for major crimes on tribal lands, yielded few answers. The autopsy report on the Hogan's dust samples revealed only human DNA matching Bigay's profile, with no trace of Eliza Tso or any unidentified persons. The audio recording of that final transmission was analyzed by acoustic experts who could determine only that the breathing sounds belonged to Bigay, and that the cutoff was sudden, not gradual as one might expect from a technical malfunction or battery failure. In the months that followed, the Navajo Nation Police Department conducted its own internal investigation, interviewing residents of Chilchanbeto and nearby communities. Several elders spoke of traditional beliefs about skinwalkers, malevolent witches capable of taking animal form, but offered no concrete information about what might have happened that October evening. 5 years have passed since Officer Darren Bigay vanished while conducting a routine welfare check. The case remains open with the FBI, listed as missing person, circumstances unknown. Eliza Tso has never been located, and her Hogan has since been demolished by family members who considered the place tainted by whatever occurred there. The only physical evidence from that night, Bigay's flashlight and service weapon, remain in an evidence locker at the Navajo Nation Police Department headquarters in Window Rock, Arizona. The patrol car he drove that evening has been retired from service, now sitting in a department impound lot, its windshield occasionally bearing handprints that cleaning crews report reappearing no matter how many times they wipe the glass clean. No trace was ever found of Officer Darren Bigay or Eliza Tso beyond the boundaries of that remote Hogan in the Arizona desert, leaving behind only questions and the chilling silence of a welfare check that crossed into territory no training manual could prepare for. On the morning of March 15, 2015, Officer Thomas Red Feather of the Oglala Sioux Tribal Police Department was dispatched to perform a welfare check at a remote residence on the Pine Ridge Reservation in South Dakota. The call had come from a concerned relative in Nebraska who hadn't heard from 62-year-old Joseph Movescamp in over a week. Red Feather, a 28-year-old officer who had grown up on the reservation, was familiar with the area and had visited Movescamp's property on previous occasions for minor disturbances. At 9:17 a.m., he radioed dispatch to confirm his departure from the station in Pine Ridge Village, providing his estimated arrival time of approximately 30 minutes. The journey to Movescamp's residence required navigating a network of unpaved roads that wound through the prairie landscape, passing abandoned homesteads and the occasional herd of cattle. According to GPS data recovered from Red Feather's patrol vehicle, he arrived at the destination at 9:48 a.m. What happened next remains a subject of speculation and concern among law enforcement officers who continue to patrol the vast reservation. The last radio transmission from Red Feather came through at 9:52 a.m., consisting of only 3 words: "The door's open." Dispatch attempted to raise him again at 10 a.m. with no response, triggering a call for backup that would arrive nearly 40 minutes later due to the remote location. When officers Brian Little Eagle and Sarah Wilson reached the property, they found Red Feather's patrol vehicle parked at an angle near the residence's gate, driver's door ajar, emergency lights still flashing. The house itself was a small single-story structure with peeling paint and a porch that sagged noticeably toward one end. As the officers approached with weapons drawn, they noted that the front door stood partially open, just as Red Feather's final transmission had indicated. Inside, they discovered signs of a struggle, overturned furniture, broken glass, and blood spatter on the walls that would later be confirmed as belonging to Officer Red Feather. What they didn't find was any sign of Red Feather himself, nor any trace of Joseph Movescamp. The search that followed would become one of the most extensive in the reservation's history, involving tribal police, county deputies, state troopers, and FBI agents. Over the next 3 days, they scoured the property and surrounding prairie, using helicopters equipped with thermal imaging and ground teams with search dogs. What they discovered only deepened the mystery. A set of bare footprints leading away from the back of the house that appeared to belong to a child, approximately size 6, with an unusually long stride that covered nearly 5 feet with each step. These tracks continued for approximately 200 yards before simply ending in the middle of an open field, with no indication of where the person who made them might have gone. Blood evidence found along the trackway was later matched to Red Feather, suggesting he had been injured and possibly dragged or carried away from the scene. The official investigation, documented in FBI case file 15A-SD-037, revealed several disturbing details about the property and its owner. Joseph Moves Camp had a history of mental health issues and had been reported to tribal authorities on multiple occasions for strange behavior, including standing motionless in his yard for hours at a time and speaking to himself in voices that neighbors described as not his own. Of particular interest to investigators was a small structure discovered approximately 50 yards behind the main house. A windowless shed built into the side of a hill, its entrance covered with a heavy steel door that had been forced open from the inside. Inside this underground space, investigators found strange symbols painted on the walls in what appeared to be blood, along with the remains of small animals arranged in ritualistic patterns. Most disturbing was a collection of children's clothing and shoes in various sizes, all covered with a fine layer of dust, as if they hadn't been touched in years. 5 years have passed since Officer Thomas Red Feather disappeared while conducting what should have been a routine welfare check. The FBI case remains open, with periodic reviews as new information or technologies become available. Joseph Moves Camp has never been located, and tribal elders familiar with his family history suggest he may have been involved with traditional practices that strayed into dangerous territory. The property where Red Feather vanished has been abandoned, its buildings gradually succumbing to the harsh prairie weather. Officers who patrol the area still report strange occurrences near the location malfunctioning radio equipment, unexplained shadows moving across the prairie at dusk, and the occasional sound of a child's laughter carried on the wind when no children are present for miles. No trace was ever found of Officer Thomas Red Feather beyond the blood spatters and footprints that marked his final journey into the South Dakota prairie, leaving behind a mystery that continues to haunt the Oglala Lakota Reservation and the law enforcement officers who patrol its vast expanse. It was early November of 2017 when Officer Jennifer Miller of the Menominee Tribal Police Department received a dispatch to check on the welfare of a family living in a remote area of the Menominee Reservation in Wisconsin. The call had come from a school social worker who was concerned after 2 children hadn't attended classes for 3 consecutive days, and their parents weren't responding to phone calls. At 31 years old, Miller had been with the tribal police for 6 years and knew the reservation's approximately 235,000 acres intimately, including the isolated northern region where the Peterson family lived. At 2:13 p.m. on November 7th, she radioed dispatch to confirm her departure. Noting the deteriorating weather conditions as an early winter storm moved through the area. The drive to the Peterson residence took Miller along County Highway VV, a narrow road that wound through dense forest land dotted with occasional clearings and homes. As the first snowflakes began to fall, she reduced her speed, the wipers of her patrol vehicle working to maintain visibility through the increasingly heavy precipitation. According to GPS data later recovered from her vehicle's computer system, Miller arrived at the Peterson residence at approximately 2:45 p.m. Her next transmission came through at 2:53 p.m., her voice calm and professional, as she reported that she was approaching the house and would conduct her welfare check before radioing back with her findings. What followed was a period of silence that would last for nearly 20 minutes, during which dispatch attempted to contact her multiple times with no response. The next transmission from Miller's vehicle came through at 3:12 p.m. and contained only what audio analysts would later describe as unusual ambient sounds, what appeared to be whispering in an unidentified language. followed by a sudden high-pitched tone that caused feedback in the dispatch center. When backup units arrived 27 minutes later, they found Miller's patrol vehicle parked with the driver's door open, engine still running, headlights cutting through the thickening snow. The vehicle was positioned facing the Peterson home, a small single-story structure approximately 50 yards away. Officer Miller was nowhere to be found. Inside the Peterson home, investigators discovered a scene that would haunt all who entered. The family of 4 parents, Michael and Sarah Peterson, and their 2 children, ages 7 and 10, were found huddled together in the master bedroom closet, fully clothed and showing no signs of physical injury. Autopsies would later reveal that all 4 had died from hypothermia, despite the indoor temperature being measured at 68 degrees when their bodies were discovered. What disturbed investigators most was the expression on each family member's face, not the peaceful appearance of those who had passed in their sleep, but rather wide-eyed terror, as if they had witnessed something unimaginable in their final moments. Scattered throughout the house were strange symbols drawn on walls and floors in what appeared to be charcoal, each resembling a spiral with lines radiating outward like a primitive sun. The official investigation, led jointly by tribal authorities and the Wisconsin Department of Justice, yielded few concrete answers about what had transpired at the Peterson home that November afternoon. Officer Miller's body was never found, despite extensive search efforts that continued for weeks. The audio recording from her final transmission was analyzed by multiple experts who could determine only that the whispering voices did not match any known language, and that the high-pitched tone that followed was beyond the normal frequency range of human speech or standard radio equipment. Of particular interest to investigators was a small camera mounted on Miller's uniform, which had continued recording for approximately 8 minutes after her final radio transmission. The footage showed her approaching the Peterson home, flashlight beam cutting through the falling snow before entering through an unlocked front door. For the next 3 minutes, the camera captured her moving through the house, calling out to the family before suddenly swinging upward as if she had fallen backward. The final 5 minutes of recording showed only the ceiling of what appeared to be the living room, accompanied by the same whispering voices and high-pitched tone that had been transmitted over the radio. In the years since Officer Miller's disappearance, the Peterson home has been demolished, replaced by a small memorial that few visitors to the reservation ever see. Tribal elders familiar with traditional Menominee beliefs speak of the Silent Watchers entities said to inhabit the deepest forests of the reservation, appearing only during the transition between seasons and taking particular interest in families with young children. Whether these traditional stories have any connection to what happened that November afternoon remains a matter of speculation. What is known is that Officer Jennifer Miller entered a home to check on a family's welfare and never emerged, leaving behind only questions and disturbing evidence that defies logical explanation. No trace was ever found of Officer Jennifer Miller beyond the 8 minutes of body camera footage that captured her final moments inside the Peterson home, a recording that continues to be analyzed by experts in search of answers that may never come. It was late August of 2019, during one of the driest summers North Dakota had seen in years, when Officer David Two Bears of the 3 affiliated tribes police department received what should have been a routine welfare check. At 39 years old, with more than a decade of service behind him, Two Bears was known across the Fort Berthold Reservation for his level-headed approach to crises and his deep familiarity with the nearly 1 million acres of rugged land he patrolled. From the oil fields stretching across Mandaree to the quiet stretches near Lake Sakakawea, he had come to know the reservation's winding roads, its people, and its unspoken stories with an almost instinctive ease. But nothing in his years of experience prepared him for the events that would unfold on August 29, 2019. Events that would leave investigators baffled, tribal elders uneasy, and an entire community haunted by whispers in a language no one could interpret. The welfare check request came from a neighbor living near 68-year-old tribal elder Henry Red Fox. The neighbor reported that Red Fox had not been seen in several days, that his dogs had grown uncharacteristically silent, and that something about the property felt unsettlingly still. It was enough to prompt dispatch to send an officer. At 4:23 p.m., Two Bears radioed in, confirming he was departing the station in Newtown and estimating an arrival time of roughly 45 minutes. His voice was calm and routine. He'd driven these roads hundreds of times. The sun still hung high above the horizon, the day was clear, and there was no indication, audible or otherwise, that anything out of the ordinary lay waiting for him. The drive westward took him across gravel roads lined with pump jacks that rose and fell steadily like iron creatures grazing against the plains. Dust swirled behind his patrol vehicle, carried by the warm prairie wind. As he drove deeper into the reservation's western reaches, the land began to change. The wide-open grasslands eventually gave way to the stark silhouettes of buttes and mesas that rose abruptly from the earth, shaped by centuries of wind erosion. The deeper he traveled, the more ancient the landscape seemed to become, as if the land itself were holding its breath. According to GPS logs later retrieved from his patrol truck's onboard computer, Officer Two Bears arrived at Henry Red Fox's property at 5:08 p.m. The mobile home sat alone in a clearing, 100 yards from where he parked. The surrounding area was still eerily still, and the only movement came from the late summer grasses brushing against the dry ground. At 5:16 p.m., he radioed dispatch again, announcing that he was approaching the residence and would report back once he completed the welfare check. His tone held no tension, no hint of fear. Dispatch acknowledged his transmission, and for the next several minutes, everything appeared perfectly normal. Then came silence. For 25 minutes, dispatch attempted repeatedly to contact Officer Two Bears. No response came through. Initially, the dispatchers assumed he was attending to a medical situation inside the home, or perhaps assisting Red Fox with something that required his full attention. But with each unanswered call, their anxiety grew, especially since Two Bears was known for meticulous communication and rarely allowed radio silence to extend longer than absolutely necessary. At 5:41 p.m., a sudden burst of radio static jolted the dispatch center. The transmission that followed was unlike anything they had ever heard. Instead of English or even distorted speech, there came only faint, layered whispering voices overlapping each other in a cadence that was neither frantic nor calm, not human nor animal, but something indescribably alien. Audio analysts who later studied the recording described the sound as unidentifiable vocalizations mixed with rhythmic, wind-like patterns unrelated to any atmospheric conditions reported that day. Among the dispatchers present at the time, several later described feeling a physical chill crawl down their spines as the whispering continued for several seconds before abruptly cutting off again, leaving behind an unsettling quiet. Backup units were dispatched immediately. When they arrived 32 minutes later, the sun was already beginning to sink beneath the western horizon, turning the buttes into long, flame-colored silhouettes. Two Bears' patrol vehicle was found parked where the GPS indicated it would be engine still running. Driver's door open, radio active, but silent. His hat remained in the passenger seat. His duty belt still hung from a hook in the truck. But the officer himself was nowhere to be found. The vehicle faced directly toward Red Fox's mobile home, which stood motionless against the dimming sky, its windows completely darkened. Approaching cautiously, the backup officers found the mobile home unlocked. Inside, the air felt dense, stale, and strangely cold, given the lingering heat outside. There were no signs of a struggle, no overturned furniture, no broken glass, nothing out of place. It was as though the house had been frozen in time. Henry Red Fox was found sitting in a recliner in the living room, eyes closed, hands resting gently on his lap. At first glance, he seemed merely asleep, but when the officers moved closer, it became clear that he had passed away. The medical examiner who later examined the body would list his cause of death as unexplained, noting no signs of trauma, illness, or cardiac arrest. It was as if he had simply stopped. What unsettled officers most were the markings. The walls, windows, and parts of the ceiling were covered with symbols drawn in what appeared to be a mixture of charcoal and animal blood. The symbols resembled concentric circles with outward-pointing lines, like sunbursts or wheels. Their arrangement had a strange, methodical symmetry, neither chaotic nor random, more reminiscent of ritual diagrams than decorative markings. Every window in the home was covered from the inside with black construction paper, taped carefully along the edges, blocking out the outside light. Later interviews would reveal that Red Fox was not known for this sort of behavior. And family members confirmed he had no history of mental illness or ritualistic tendencies. Investigators combed the house for clues. They found no footprints other than those expected, no signs of forced entry, no signs that Officer Two Bears had been harmed inside the home. The most important discovery came when they found his duty jacket draped neatly over a kitchen chair. Inside one of the pockets was a small digital audio recorder activated manually, as if he had turned it on moments before disappearing. The recording lasted 10 minutes. What it captured became one of the most disturbing pieces of evidence ever collected in a disappearance case on the reservation. It began with the soft crunch of footsteps as Two Bears approached the home. He knocked, waited, then called out in a calm tone, identifying himself as tribal police. A metallic click indicated he opened the unlocked door and stepped inside. His breathing was audible, steady, professional, unhurried. When he discovered Red Fox's body, he spoke softly as if trying to awaken him. A long pause followed. He began to say something into his radio, perhaps attempting to report the elder's condition, but the words were cut short. For nearly 3 minutes, the recording captured only silence. Not true silence, there was an uncanny absence of everyday sounds. No wind, no insects, no mechanical humming from appliances, nothing. The kind of silence that feels too perfect, too absolute, as if the home itself were holding its breath. Two Bears could be heard shifting uneasily. At one point he murmured to himself, "Why are the windows covered?" His voice was low, confused. Then the first whisper appeared. It was faint, distant, as if coming from somewhere deep within the walls of the home. The whispering did not match any language. Its tones rose and fell in rhythmic, almost chant-like sequences. Two Bears reacted instantly. His breathing quickened. He called out sharply, "Who's there?" The whispering intensified, multiplying into overlapping voices that layered over one another in strange harmonic distortions. Suddenly, a rushing wind filled the house. The audio suggested the wind was circling him, pulling through the narrow spaces like air forced through a sealed cavity. Weather records confirmed there had been no wind gusts in the area that day, and nothing about the structure of the mobile home could have produced such a sound naturally. Two Bears' boots scraped across the floor as he moved quickly, perhaps backing away or reaching for his radio. He can be heard shouting, "Stop! Stop right there!" The whispering continued, growing louder, the wind rising behind it in an unnatural crescendo. Then came the overlapping voices, male and female tones, high-pitched and low, Some soft and some rasping like dry leaves dragged across wood, fell speaking in unison. Linguistic experts would later conclude that the recording did not contain any identifiable language or dialect. The voices seemed to form patterns rather than words, as though communicating in a code beyond human comprehension. In the final 30 seconds of the recording, the wind sound grew violent, almost like a vortex forming inside the home. Two Bears' voice broke through only twice more. His last audible words, spoken in a breathless whisper, were, I see you." The recording ended abruptly with a burst of static. Despite weeks of search efforts, ground teams, dogs, helicopters, volunteers, no trace of Officer David Two Bears was ever found. His disappearance made no logical sense. He had left no footprints leading away from the home, no signs of struggle, no evidence that he'd been dragged, pursued, or injured. It was as if he had simply vanished into the air. Tribal elders, when consulted privately, spoke of the little people, supernatural beings said to inhabit the Badlands and mesas. They were not necessarily small. The term little referred more to their elusiveness, their ability to appear and disappear, to communicate through wind and whispers. According to tradition, they were watchers of places where the land was thin, places where time and space could shift. Some elders refused to step foot near the property, even after the mobile home was removed months later. They stood at a distance and prayed in low voices, offering tobacco to the west. The North Dakota Bureau of Criminal Investigation eventually closed the case due to lack of evidence, though the final report reads more like a list of unanswered questions than a conclusion. Officially, the case is classified as an unresolved disappearance. Unofficially, investigators admit they have no explanation. The property where Henry Red Fox once lived now sits empty. A small stone marker placed by his family stands near the entrance to what used to be the driveway. The carved circle on the stone, selected by his granddaughter, looks eerily similar to the markings found inside the home, though she insists she had never seen the symbols before. Visitors who stop near the site often report strange sensations. Some say the wind there feels colder. Others describe an unnatural hush that settles over the clearing. A few claim they heard faint whispering on days when the air was perfectly still. To this day, the digital recorder containing Officer Two Bears' final moments remains locked away in an evidence vault. Investigators who have listened to it privately sometimes refuse to hear it a second time. They all describe the same unsettling experience. The voices sound close, too close, and the wind sounds like it is moving inside a confined space, spiraling with deliberate purpose. The final conclusion, written in the internal tribal brief, is simple, stark, and chilling. No trace was ever found of Officer David Two Bears beyond the 10-minute recording captured inside the Red Fox residence, a recording containing whispers in a language no living person has been able to identify. What happened inside that home remains unknown. And as the elders often say when the subject arises, some places remember, and some places are not meant to be entered alone. The land at Fort Berthold still whispers, and the whispering never stops. It was early December of 2020, deep into the first true cold snap of the Northern Plains winter, when Officer Rachel White Calf of the Blackfeet Tribal Police Department received the call that would mark the final known moments of her life. The Blackfeet Reservation, a vast expanse of mountains, plains, deep forests, and ancient stories, had always held an uneasy balance between the modern world and the old spirits that tribal elders warned were never far away. At 28 years old, White Calf was still learning the territory. She patrolled a land that could be breathtaking in one moment and unsettling in the next, especially along the eastern edge where the reservation bordered the dark, jagged profile of Glacier National Park. She had been with the department a little over 3 years and was known for her calm presence, her sharp instincts, and her respect for both the land and the people who lived on it. None of that, however, could have prepared her for what she encountered on December 4th, 2020. The welfare check request came from a relative in Calgary who had grown increasingly worried about 54-year-old tribal member George Runningwolf. He called weekly, always on the same day, always at the same time. When those calls stopped abruptly, the relative reached out to the Blackfeet authorities. Dispatch reviewed the details. Isolated cabin, winter conditions, no communication in over a week. Standard protocol dictated immediate response. At 10:17 a.m., Officer White Calf radioed dispatch from the police station in Browning, confirming her departure and estimating an arrival time of about 1 hour, factoring in the icy roads and drifting snow. She set out along Highway 2, the long, exposed stretch of road that carved across the southern edge of the reservation. The reservation sprawled around her open plains, dusted white, scattered pines bending in the wind, and beyond them, the rising wall of the Rocky Mountains. The peaks were smothered in fresh snow, their slopes disappearing into clouds. Visibility came and went with the whims of winter gusts. As she drove, tire tracks faded behind her in minutes, swallowed by blowing powder. About 45 minutes outside Browning, she turned north onto a Forest Service road. The road climbed quickly, weaving through patches of dense trees and rocky slopes. Snow blanketed everything thick on the branches, deeper still on the unplowed road ahead. Radio logs recovered later confirmed that she had slowed significantly, navigating the final miles with extreme caution. It was a remote region, seldom traveled even in summer and dangerously quiet in winter. Her patrol vehicle's GPS data showed she arrived at George Runningwolf's property at 11:25 a.m. The cabin appeared on her dashboard camera a moment later, a small, weathered log structure tucked between towering spruces, smoke curling faintly from its chimney. At 11:33 a.m., she radioed dispatch again, her voice steady, professional, routine. "Dispatch, this is White Calf. I'm approaching the cabin now. We'll conduct welfare check and report back." "Copy that, White Calf," dispatch responded. "Be advised, winter storm expected early afternoon. Keep us updated." There were no signs of anything unusual in her tone, no hint of what was to follow. What came next was 30 minutes of silence. Dispatch attempted twice to request status. No response. The third attempt came with a note of concern from the dispatcher, who had grown familiar with White Calf's reliable communication patterns. Again, silence. At 12:03 p.m., the radio came alive. But it was not Rachel White Calf's voice. The transmission that crackled through the speakers was described later by audio specialists as unusual rhythmic sounds, a term that did little justice to what it actually contained. What dispatch heard were low, steady pulses resembling drum beats, synchronized and yet layered, as if coming from several directions at once. Beneath the drumming was chanting voices, rising and falling in an unknown language. Neither Blackfeet nor any indigenous dialect cataloged in Montana. The chanting was soft, almost whisper-like, but unmistakably deliberate, as though part of a ritual. The sounds faded in and out of the transmission like wind sweeping across an old microphone. The moment the dispatchers tried to respond, the transmission ended. Backup was sent immediately. It took 38 minutes for the nearest units to reach the cabin, delayed by worsening snowfall and deteriorating road conditions. The officers arrived to find White Calf's patrol vehicle parked at the mouth of the driveway, driver's door open, engine still running, headlights casting beams of pale light across the frozen yard. The front of the vehicle faced northeast toward the cabin 75 yards away. There were no footprints leading away from the patrol vehicle. The snow was undisturbed except for the faint depressions of White Calf's boot prints leading toward the cabin. Inside the vehicle, her radio was active but silent. The heater hummed. Her gloves and hat remained on the passenger seat. Nothing else appeared out of place, no signs of struggle, no trace of anyone else. The officers followed the tracks through the snow, approaching the cabin cautiously. Smoke still rose from the chimney, suggesting someone had tended the fire recently. The front door was closed but unlocked. When they entered the cabin, they immediately sensed that something was not right. The interior was warm, far too warm. The fire burned vigorously in the wood stove, casting flickering yellow light across the log walls. A half-empty mug of coffee sat on the kitchen table, still faintly steaming. A coat hung neatly by the front door. A pair of boots rested beside it. And George Running Wolf was sitting in the corner. He sat in a simple wooden chair, facing the wall. At first glance, he seemed merely asleep. But when one of the officers touched his shoulder, the truth became apparent: he was dead. His eyes were closed, his expression peaceful, his posture unchanged from how he must have been sitting when he breathed his last breath. The cause of death would later be recorded as unexplained. What drew the investigators' immediate attention, however, were the markings on the floor around the chair. Circles, lines, spirals, shapes drawn in ash taken from the wood stove, arranged with careful precision. The patterns did not match Blackfeet ceremonial symbols, nor did they resemble any known indigenous artwork or ritual structure in the region. The symbols radiated outward like a map or a diagram, a complex configuration that no one present could decipher. Then came the photographs. Scattered around the cabin, pinned to walls, tucked behind books, stacked on shelves, were dozens of photographs of George Running Wolf in various places across the reservation. Some showed him near Two Medicine Lake, others near the plains north of Browning, others still near forested foothills. In every image, Running Wolf stood alone, or appeared to be, because in the background, sometimes behind a tree, sometimes partially obscured by shadow, sometimes little more than a shape at the edge of the frame, was a dark figure. Not quite human, not quite defined, always present, always close, always watching. Investigators collected the photographs, trying to determine whether the figure was an artifact of lighting, dust, or some optical illusion. But the more they studied them, the more consistent the figure appeared. It was always roughly the same height, always positioned behind Running Wolf, and always blurred, as though it were an object refusing to be captured clearly. The search for Rachel White Calf began immediately. Officers fanned out through the surrounding forest, calling her name, checking for signs of a struggle, footprints, dropped equipment, anything. Snow fell steadily, erasing potential clues. Darkness approached early. They found nothing. White Calf's body camera footage, however, offered investigators a partial window into her final recorded moments. The footage began with her exit from the patrol vehicle, her breath fogged in the cold air. She approached the cabin with deliberate steps, announcing herself before pushing the door open. Her voice was clear and steady. She discovered Running Wolf's body and attempted to wake him, then checked for vital signs. Her expression changed gradually from confusion to concern to something bordering on fear. She spoke softly into her radio, though that portion of audio never reached dispatch. Then the camera shifted. Investigators reviewing the footage noted that the camera did not seem to move because of White Calf turning her body. Instead, the angle changed abruptly, swinging toward the shadowed corner of the living room opposite where Running Wolf sat. There was nothing obviously visible in the corner, nothing that should have drawn her attention. But something had. For the final 10 minutes of the footage, the camera remained fixed on the corner. The shadows there seemed to waver, stretch, contract, and shift in ways inconsistent with the natural movement of light. It was as if the darkness itself were alive, breathing, expanding, shrinking. Audio recorded soft, rhythmic pulses similar to the drumming heard in the final radio transmission. The chanting could also be heard faintly, rising and falling like a distant echo, as though multiple voices were layered atop one another in a pattern that suggested intent. White Calf did not speak during those 10 minutes. Not a single word. Her steady breathing was audible, but nothing else. At 12 minutes and 26 seconds, the body camera abruptly cut out, not from impact or obstruction, but a sudden loss of power that technicians later could not explain. The battery, when analyzed, was still more than half charged. The footage never resumed. Search efforts continued for weeks despite heavy snowfall. Drones were deployed. Tracking dogs were brought in. Volunteers scoured the forest on snowshoes. Officers checked vacant cabins, ravines, drainage areas, and known campsites. Winter storms complicated everything, burying potential leads. Not a single piece of evidence related to Rachel White Calf was ever found. Not clothing, not equipment, not tracks. Tribal elders were consulted. Many of them spoke quietly, as though discussing a subject not meant for broad conversation. They spoke of the shadow people, entities said to inhabit the darkest, coldest parts of the reservation beings of winter, who slipped between worlds, attaching themselves to individuals who had disrupted the natural balance in ways unknown. The elders did not say these stories explained what happened, only that some places carried histories older than the tribe itself. Some places, they said, were not meant to be entered in December. The cabin where Running Wolf lived was boarded up by tribal authorities in early spring. The official reasoning cited structural concerns, though none of the responding officers believed that explanation. Many refused to set foot inside it again. A few refused even to speak of the case. In official reports, the disappearance remains unsolved, unexplained, unresolved. A welfare check that ended with a missing officer, a deceased tribal elder, and a body camera recording that offered more questions than answers. In unofficial conversations, those who have listened to the recovered audio speak in low tones. They describe the chanting as something that feels ancient, something that resonates deep in the chest. They describe the drumming as coming from everywhere at once, and they describe the shifting darkness in the footage as something they can't explain, but can't forget either. No trace of Officer Rachel White Calf was ever found beyond those 15 minutes of footage, 15 minutes that reveal no attacker, no struggle, no definitive presence. Only a dark shape in the corner. Only the whispers of an unidentified language. And an overwhelming sense, felt by everyone who watches the video, that something in that cabin was waiting for her. Something that did not intend to let her leave. It was late June of 2018 when Officer Carlos Romero of the Tohono O'Odham Police Department was dispatched to conduct a welfare check at a remote residence in the western region of the Tohono O'Odham Nation in Arizona. The call had come from a concerned relative in Tucson who hadn't heard from 71-year-old Maria Santiago in nearly a week, and noted that her usually punctual daily phone calls had stopped abruptly. At 34 years old, Romero had been with the tribal police for 8 years and was familiar with the vast desert territory he patrolled, including the isolated western region that bordered the Organ Pipe Cactus National Monument. At 7:42 a.m. on June 28th, he radioed dispatch to confirm his departure from the police station in Sells, providing his estimated arrival time of approximately 50 minutes. The journey to Santiago's residence took Romero along Arizona State Route 86, which cut through the heart of the reservation before branching off onto a series of unpaved roads that wound through the Sonoran Desert. As he drove deeper into the reservation's western region, the landscape grew increasingly barren, with saguaro cacti standing like silent sentinels against the rising desert sun. According to GPS data later recovered from his patrol vehicle's computer system, Romero arrived at Santiago's property at approximately 8:33 a.m. His next transmission came through at 8:41 a.m., his voice professional as he reported that he was approaching the residence and would conduct his welfare check before radioing back with his findings. What followed was a period of silence that would last for nearly 20 minutes, during which dispatch attempted to contact him multiple times with no response. The next transmission from Romero's vehicle came through at 9:01 a.m. and contained only what audio analysts would later describe as unidentifiable vocalizations, what appeared to be a single voice speaking in an unknown language, with an echo-like quality that suggested it was coming from multiple directions at once. When backup units arrived 27 minutes later, they found Romero's patrol vehicle parked near the entrance to Santiago's property, driver's door open, engine still running. The vehicle was positioned facing west, toward a small mobile home that sat approximately 60 yards away, its metal exterior glinting in the morning sun. Officer Romero was nowhere to be found. Inside Maria Santiago's mobile home, investigators discovered a scene that would puzzle even the most experienced members of the search team. The residence appeared undisturbed, with the air conditioner still running and a breakfast of half-eaten toast and coffee sitting on the kitchen table. Santiago herself was found sitting on the edge of her bed, fully dressed and appearing to be asleep. When officers approached, they discovered that she had passed away, though the cause of death would later be determined as unexplained by the medical examiner. What disturbed investigators most were the strange markings found on the walls of the bedroom. A series of spirals and geometric shapes drawn in what appeared to be charcoal, arranged in a pattern that no one could identify. Even more puzzling were the numerous mirrors found throughout the home, each covered with a thin layer of dust except for strange handprints that appeared as if someone had recently wiped them clean. The official investigation, led jointly by tribal authorities and the Arizona Department of Public Safety, yielded few concrete answers about what had transpired at Santiago's home that June morning. Officer Romero's body was never found, despite extensive search efforts that continued for weeks, hampered by the extreme summer heat of the desert. The audio recording from his final transmission was analyzed by multiple experts who could determine only that the voice did not match any known language, and that the echo-like quality was inconsistent with the acoustics of a small mobile home. Of particular interest to investigators was a small digital recorder found in Romero's pocket, which had been activated manually and continued recording for approximately 12 minutes after his final radio transmission. The audio captured his approach to the mobile home, his entry through an unlocked door, and his discovery of Santiago in the bedroom. What followed were several minutes of him attempting to wake her, before the sudden onset of the mysterious voice that seemed to come from everywhere at once, growing progressively louder until the recording abruptly ended. In the months since Officer Romero's disappearance, the mobile home where Maria Santiago lived has been removed from the property, which now stands empty except for a small wooden cross placed by family members. Tribal elders familiar with traditional Tohono O'odham beliefs speak of the Echo People entities said to inhabit the desert during the hottest months of the year, communicating through reflections and mirrors and taking particular interest in those who live alone. Whether these traditional stories have any connection to what happened that June morning remains a matter of speculation. What is known is that Officer Carlos Romero entered a home to check on an elderly woman's welfare and never emerged, leaving behind only questions and disturbing evidence that continues to baffle investigators. No trace was ever found of Officer Carlos Romero beyond the 12 minutes of audio recording that captured his final moments inside Maria Santiago's mobile home. A recording that contains a voice in a language no linguist has been able to identify. It was early January of 2021 when Officer Michael Blackhorse of the Rosebud Sioux Tribal Police Department was dispatched to conduct a welfare check at a remote residence on the Rosebud Reservation in South Dakota. The call had come from a concerned neighbor who hadn't seen 45-year-old Daniel Brown Eagle for several days and noted that his usually well-tended driveway was untouched by the recent snowfall. At 36 years old, Blackhorse had been with the tribal police for 9 years and was familiar with the vast prairie territory he patrolled, including the isolated northern region where Brown Eagle lived. At 2:15 p.m. on January 8th, he radioed dispatch to confirm his departure from the police station in Rosebud, providing his estimated arrival time of approximately 40 minutes, given the winter road conditions. The journey to Brown Eagle's residence took Blackhorse along BIA Highway 33, which cut through the heart of the reservation before branching off onto a series of county roads that wound through the snow-covered prairie. As he drove deeper into the reservation's northern region, the landscape grew increasingly barren, with frozen fields stretching to the horizon under a gray winter sky. According to GPS data later recovered from his patrol vehicle's computer system, Blackhorse arrived at Brown Eagle's property at approximately 2:56 p.m. His next transmission came through at 3:04 p.m., his voice steady as he reported that he was approaching the residence and would conduct his welfare check before radioing back with his findings. What followed was a period of silence that would last for nearly 25 minutes, during which dispatch attempted to contact him multiple times with no response. The next transmission from Blackhorse's vehicle came through at 3:29 p.m. and contained only what audio analysts would later describe as unusual ambient sounds, what appeared to be footsteps crunching in snow, accompanied by a low humming noise that seemed to fluctuate in pitch. When backup units arrived 33 minutes later, they found Blackhorse's patrol vehicle parked near the entrance to Brown Eagle's property. Driver's door open, engine still running. The vehicle was positioned facing north, toward a small frame house that sat approximately 80 yards away, its windows dark against the afternoon sky. Officer Blackhorse was nowhere to be found. Inside Daniel Brown Eagle's house, investigators discovered a scene that would trouble even the most experienced members of the search team. The residence appeared undisturbed, with the furnace still running and a mug of hot chocolate sitting on the kitchen table. Brown Eagle himself was found sitting in a wooden chair in the living room, fully dressed and appearing to be asleep. When officers approached, they discovered that he had passed away, though the cause of death would later be determined as unexplained by the medical examiner. What disturbed investigators most were the footprints found throughout the home, a series of tracks in the dust on the floors that appeared to belong to someone with unusually small feet, approximately size 5, with an irregular pattern that suggested an unusual gait. Even more puzzling were the footprints found outside the house, a set of tracks that led from the back door to a nearby tree line approximately 200 yards away, where they simply ended in the middle of an open field, with no indication of where the person who made them might have gone. The official investigation, led jointly by tribal authorities and the South Dakota Division of Criminal Investigation, yielded few concrete answers about what had transpired at Brown Eagle's home that January afternoon. Officer Blackhorse's body was never found, despite extensive search efforts that continued for weeks, hampered by increasingly harsh winter weather. The audio recording from his final transmission was analyzed by multiple experts who could determine only that the footsteps were inconsistent with normal human gait, and that the humming noise did not match any known mechanical or natural sound. Of particular interest to investigators was a small body camera worn by Blackhorse, which had continued recording for approximately 15 minutes after his final radio transmission. The footage showed his approach to the house, his entry through an unlocked door, and his discovery of Brown Eagle in the chair. What followed were several minutes of him attempting to wake Brown Eagle, before the camera suddenly turned toward the back door, where it remained focused for the final 10 minutes of recording, capturing only what appeared to be the door opening and closing on its own, despite no visible wind or draft. In the months since Officer Blackhorse's disappearance, the house where Daniel Brown Eagle lived has been boarded up by tribal authorities, who consider the site potentially hazardous due to unexplained structural issues. Tribal elders familiar with traditional Lakota beliefs speak of the Little People entities said to inhabit the prairies and forests of the reservation, appearing only during the winter months and leaving behind tracks that suddenly end as if they have vanished into thin air. Whether these traditional stories have any connection to what happened that January afternoon remains a matter of speculation. What is known is that Officer Michael Blackhorse entered a house to check on a man's welfare and never emerged, leaving behind only questions and disturbing evidence that continues to trouble those who investigated the case. No trace was ever found of Officer Michael Blackhorse beyond the 15 minutes of body camera footage that captured his final moments inside Daniel Brown Eagle's house. Footage that shows nothing definitive but leaves viewers with an overwhelming sense of unease. It was late October of 2016 when Officer Rebecca Johnson of the Red Lake Tribal Police Department was dispatched to conduct a welfare check at a remote residence on the Red Lake Reservation in Minnesota. The call had come from a concerned teacher at the local school who hadn't seen 12-year-old Thomas Spears in class for 3 days and noted that his parents hadn't responded to phone calls. At 29 years old, Johnson had been with the tribal police for 5 years and was still learning the vast territory she patrolled, particularly the isolated western region where the Spears family lived. At 6:47 p.m. on October 27th, she radioed dispatch to confirm her departure from the police station in Red Lake, providing her estimated arrival time of approximately 50 minutes, given the rural road conditions. The journey to the Spears residence took Johnson along a series of county roads that cut through the reservation's forested landscape, passing lakes and wetlands that reflected the deepening twilight. As she drove deeper into the reservation's western region, the landscape grew increasingly isolated, with fewer homes and more dense woodland. According to GPS data later recovered from her patrol vehicle's computer system, Johnson arrived at the Spears property at approximately 7:38 p.m. Her next transmission came through at 7:46 p.m., her voice calm as she reported that she was approaching the residence and would conduct her welfare check before radioing back with her findings. What followed was a period of silence that would last for nearly 20 minutes, during which dispatch attempted to contact her multiple times with no response. The next transmission from Johnson's vehicle came through at 8:06 p.m., and contained only what audio analysts would later describe as unidentifiable vocalizations, what appeared to be multiple voices speaking in an unknown language, with a child's laughter occasionally audible beneath the other sounds. When backup units arrived 34 minutes later, they found Johnson's patrol vehicle parked near the entrance to the Spears property, driver's door open, engine still running. The vehicle was positioned facing west, toward a small single-story house that sat approximately 70 yards away, its windows dark except for a single light visible in what appeared to be a bedroom window. Officer Johnson was nowhere to be found. Inside the Spears home, investigators discovered a scene that would haunt all who entered. The house appeared undisturbed, with the television still on in the living room and a half-eaten meal sitting on the kitchen table. The family of 4 parents, Robert and Mary Spears, and their 2 children, ages 8 and 12, were found huddled together in the master bedroom, fully clothed and showing no signs of physical injury. Autopsies would later reveal that all 4 had died from unknown causes, with no toxins or substances found in their systems. What disturbed investigators most were the strange markings found on The walls of the bedroom, a series of symbols drawn in what appeared to be charcoal, arranged in a pattern that no one could identify. Even more puzzling were the numerous audio recordings found throughout the home, each cassette tape labeled with dates spanning the previous 6 months, all containing what appeared to be the same unknown language heard in Johnson's final transmission. The official investigation, led jointly by tribal authorities and the Minnesota Bureau of Criminal Apprehension, yielded few concrete answers about what had transpired at the Spears home that October evening. Officer Johnson's body was never found, despite extensive search efforts that continued for weeks. The audio recording from her final transmission was analyzed by multiple experts who could determine only that the voices did not match any known language, and that the child's laughter was inconsistent with any recording the Spears family owned. Of particular interest to investigators was a small body camera worn by Johnson, which had continued recording for approximately 12 minutes after her final radio transmission. The footage showed her approach to the house, her entry through an unlocked door, and her discovery of the family in the bedroom. What followed were several minutes of her attempting to wake them, before the camera suddenly turned toward the closet door, which slowly opened on its own, revealing only darkness before the recording abruptly ended. In the years since Officer Johnson's disappearance, the house where the Spears family lived has been demolished, replaced by a small clearing that few visitors to the reservation ever see. Tribal elders familiar with traditional Ojibwe beliefs speak of the Dark Walkers entities said to inhabit the deepest forests of the reservation, communicating through unknown languages and taking particular interest in families with young children. Whether these traditional stories have any connection to what happened that October evening remains a matter of speculation. What is known is that Officer Rebecca Johnson entered a home to check on a family's welfare and never emerged, leaving behind only questions and disturbing evidence that continues to baffle investigators. No trace was ever found of Officer Rebecca Johnson beyond the 12 minutes of body camera footage that captured her final moments inside the Spears home, footage that shows nothing definitive but leaves viewers with an overwhelming sense of dread. The American landscape remains vast and unknowable, particularly within the boundaries of tribal reservations that span millions of acres across this country. These sovereign territories, home to Native American communities for generations, contain spaces where modern law enforcement sometimes encounters phenomena that defy explanation. The 8 cases we've examined tonight represent moments when tribal police officers answered routine calls for welfare checks and crossed into territory that no training manual could prepare them for. What connects these disparate incidents from reservations across the country is not just their disturbing nature, but the lingering questions that they leave behind. In each case, officers arrived expecting to find citizens in need of assistance, but instead encountered something that challenged their understanding of the natural world. The Navajo Nation, Pine Ridge, Menominee, Fort Berthold, Blackfeet, Tohono O'odham, Rosebud, and Red Lake. Each reservation has its own traditional beliefs and cultural context. Yet the phenomena described in these cases share striking similarities. Unknown languages, strange symbols, unexplained sounds, and the sudden disappearance of trained law enforcement officers who were simply doing their jobs. The tribal police departments that serve these communities operate with limited resources in some of the most challenging environments in American law enforcement. When an officer vanishes while on duty, the impact ripples through close-knit communities that already face numerous challenges. Each of the 8 officers we've discussed tonight left behind families, colleagues, and communities that continue to grapple with not just the loss, but the mystery of what exactly happened during those fateful welfare checks. The cases remain open, filed away in evidence rooms with notes indicating circumstances unknown or unexplained phenomena. What these stories remind us is that there are still places in this country where the veil between the known and unknown grows thin, where ancient beliefs intersect with modern law enforcement, and where some questions may never have satisfactory answers. The traditional stories and beliefs of Native American communities often speak of entities and phenomena that exist beyond Western understanding of the natural world. Whether these traditional explanations hold any truth or whether there are other explanations for what happened to these 8 officers remains a matter of speculation. What is undeniable is that something unexplainable occurred during each of these welfare checks. Something that resulted in the disappearance of trained law enforcement officers who were simply trying to ensure the well-being of community members. The silence that follows each of these cases is perhaps the most disturbing element of all. In a world where we expect answers, where we believe every mystery can eventually be solved through investigation and technology, these 8 cases stand as reminders that some phenomena may forever remain beyond our understanding. The audio recordings, body camera footage, and physical evidence collected from each scene provide tantalizing clues but no definitive answers. They represent moments when the rational world of law enforcement collided with something that defies categorization, leaving behind only questions and the chilling silence of stories that refuse to be fully explained. If you or someone you know has a true story to share, leave it in the comments below. Our researchers examine every account for potential verification and future inclusion in our series. The files we examine are drawn from official records, witness testimony, and documented incidents that continue to puzzle investigators and challenge our understanding of what is possible in the vast and varied landscapes of America. Thank you for watching.